What if everything that we've ever been taught about happiness is backwards? Today's guest spent 26 years chasing success as a broker before discovering his profound truth that true happiness is not found in outcomes, it's found in states of being. And here's what nobody's talking about, because an entire country is proving that it works. Welcome back to the Mind of George Show. This is where we cut through the noise and get real about what it takes to build and scale something meaningful through messaging, marketing, customer journey, and most importantly, our mindset. No tactics, no hacks, no slimy strategies, just honest conversations about aligning who you are with what you do. And today's guest, Tom, is an absolute madman. I love him. I will have him back anytime because my mind was blown up around happiness. And in this episode, we dive into how he just got back from Bhutan, the country. I did know that was the country, but I have no idea where it is, and why they are measuring the success of their country in gross national happiness, and how they do that compared to how we live in the States and in North America and even in Europe, and how we're bombarded, literally derelicting. I don't even know if that's the right word, our happiness. We talk in the power of our state and state changes over outcomes. We talk about finding peace in a chaotic world. We talk about how true meditation truly is versus the misconceptions that people are fed. And this had kind of opened my eyes and blew my brain when it comes to happiness. And so our state, how we feel on the inside, our emotional state and our mental state is what determines the results that we have in our life. And the conversation that we had today genuinely shifted the way that I approach success and happiness tied together. And so if you've ever fallen into the trap like me of like wanting approval or external validation, or you feel like you have those things, but you don't have that real peace and purpose on the inside, or you want to learn how to be more instead of living your life on a to-do list and a checklist, this episode is for you and so many more people. And so I'm really excited to share it with you. And so without further ado, let's get into the show. All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Mind of George Show. I have a confession to make that I selfishly almost would prefer not to hit record and share this message and conversation because I've been connecting with today's guest. And he speaks my love language of presence, of connection, of humanity, of happiness, and is a walking pot of wisdom. And I mean, he went from living one life to completely shifting and living an alternative life, and has a mission to help, I believe, over 1 billion people feel what I think would be true happiness. He was a broker in finance for 26 years, and for most of his life felt like he didn't know what to do, what he was meant to do, what his calling was. And now he understands his calling is to help people find their passion and purpose by connecting with mindfulness and meditation. And he's spoken all over the world, spoken for companies that you and I consume, we know about, we see about. And what I've learned in the short time is probably one of the most interesting men that I would rather just sit by a fire and listen to, because we're going to get started. And I'm just going to lead you a little bit before we even dive in. Who would have thought that a country would have a gross national happiness board, and then this gentleman gets to go sit down and figure out the secrets to success as a country. So without further ado, and I couldn't do his whole bio justice, I wanted to welcome my friend Tom to the show. So Tom, welcome to the show. Me too, man. I'm intrigued. And I was like, you need to stop sharing this because we need to get this on the recording. But you were sharing with me before we got started that you just got back from a meeting with the Bhutanese government's National Happiness Board for their country. And I want you to share with everybody what you just shared with me, because it was mind-blowing.
Yeah, well, that's kind of how it was for me as well. I had been slightly aware of the Bhutanese Gross National Happiness Program, which is where that country does not measure their success based upon gross domestic product, GDP, which is where most countries really will kind of be the barometer for how successful that country's being. Whereas what they do, they actually go around on 9 different metrics. They measure the level of happiness within their society. And that for them is the determining factor as to how successful they are as a country. And I was so honored and privileged to be on this beautiful little remote island over the last few days just off Bali, an island called Nusa Penida, with the advisory board from Bhutan for their Gross National Happiness Program. And we were brainstorming what that program actually entails as to how they have measured and managed to get to this level of success with their happiness within the country. But what does that look like if we were to roll that out on a global level? And this is where we're sort of doing some brainstorming as to what do we need to do to take what you've done in a microcosm of Bhutan and manage to take that into a global level. And, one of the things that I really thought about while listening to them and their presentations and sitting around lunch and dinner tables talking about this was, imagine if we were to survey, if we had the capacity to do this, where we surveyed every single person on the planet and we were to say, are you happy? And answer these questions around your measure of happiness. And if we came back with, let's just say 75% of the world said no, then we'd really have to ask ourselves, what are we doing? For me, that was a really big contemplation. Wow, how happy are we as a species? And if we're not happy, then what are we doing collectively? And why are we doing what we're doing if we're not happy? And so it really asks us the question, what is the point of existence? Why are we doing what we're doing if we're not generally as a species happy and healthy? Because ultimately those are the two things that we should be, is happy and healthy. And it really is quite fascinating. We start pulling back the veil and opening up that, can of worms, I guess, as to what we're doing in our society and why we're doing what we're doing.
I love it. And I'm gonna ask you a question about this, because you were sharing something about billboards, which I think is like profoundly powerful. But even hearing about Bhutan, right, and having this national happiness board, as they're working from the top down of like, how can we create a culture and a form of measure for our residents, for our citizens to be able to experience, happiness. And I feel like in our countries, right, Australia, the United States, Canada, it's almost the other way, where we have to fight for our happiness and our health because we're being bombarded from the top down. And you were sharing before about like even their rule about billboards. And I think it's so powerful and profound just for people's perspective. Can you unpack that for us?
There's three things that really stood out for me when we're talking to them. One was, it was a very flippant comment that they made, which they hadn't really taken into great consideration. It was just, we don't do that, which is they don't have advertising everywhere, billboards on the street and, adverts all over trains and adverts on the back of buses and trucks and adverts in the skies and adverts all over the place. And if you think about just taking that one thing out of that society, this idea that you are continuously being imposed upon with your eyeballs, the idea that there's something you don't have that we're going to try and convince you that you should have. And that if you don't have enough money for it, we're going to make you feel unhappy enough so that you can do whatever you have to do to try and get that thing, because getting that thing will be better for my business. And if you take that, just that one thing out of the society, what are the implications of that? Yes, it might be a bit more challenging for the economics of some of the businesses, but does that add to greater happiness in your society? Well, obviously it does, because that's what the Bhutanese have found, that it's making a positive impact. The other thing that's really interesting is that they prioritize, and we talked about this before we started recording, they prioritize nature over humans, human exploitation of nature. So they've got some of the most amazing mountains, which would no doubt make a lot of money out of if you put ski lodges on them, but no one's allowed into those mountains. You're banned from hiking, skiing, and exploiting those mountains. They said those mountains, they have spirits in them. They have, other existences going on in those mountains. There's animals and plants and all sorts of things that exist, and those mountains are for them. And it's not like humans just go in and say, well, no, I want to claim those mountains. I want to exploit those mountains because I can make some money out of them. They preserve them. And so those mountains, people aren't allowed to go hiking in, which is quite a phenomenal idea. And the third thing that they have, which I thought was really beautiful, is, again, not a big economic factor, but they have this really deep sense of volunteering within their community, which is people surrendering their time, surrendering their ability to make more money to actually go and support other people. And it's just a given, and it's just a deep sense of what it is to be part of a communal experience. And we've become very isolated, separated, segregated in our very economic, capitalistic world. And whereas for them, it's much more about a sense of belonging and a sense of community and a sense of support and kindness and compassion and empathy, which you only have to walk down to downtown LA and realize there's 50,000 people living in tents, feeling extremely isolated and unsupported. So we've got a lot of work to do, I think, and we can learn a lot from the Bhutanese for sure.
Oh, I just even hearing you say that with the like no adverts, of like not intentionally demanding extra eyeballs and creating this lack.
then surrounding and respecting nature, which is like the greatest presence gift ever. Like even the Japanese, I think it's called Shirin Yoko. And I read about it in a book. I think it was The Comfort Crisis of the Wedge, where like they started installing and intentionally in the middle of cities protecting forested areas to make sure that people were able to access them and plug into nature as human beings. And then the third aspect being, let's go do something of service, like give away what we want to get to create this level of happiness, which I absolutely love. And then to your point of, right, being healthy and happy, like those are some of the core ingredients that even as entrepreneurs and everyone listening to this, that capitalistic society creates like more time behind the laptop, more time on a screen, more time in meetings, more time in offices. And it removes us further from two of those three things, which would be nature and serving people, and then gives more exposure for us to be attacked by all the adverts in capitalism. So it's really, really powerful. It's mind blowing to me to hear. I love it.
Yeah,
I love it.
yeah. One of the things that I teach a lot in my coaching program for conscious leaders is that um, it's not about hustling and doing more. It's not about trying to make more. It's actually about what state you're in while you're doing what you're doing, the state you're in. And this really comes back to the Bhutanese. They're more interested in the state of their people and then letting that become the determining factor for then what they go and do. And, for me, there is, I don't work between 1 and 3. I could make more money if I worked between 1 and 3 every day, but I like to sort of have a big fat window of Tom time, I call it, in the middle of the day.
Tom time, I love
and
that.
It really allows me, I have a morning Tom time session before I start working, and then I work for the mid-morning, and then I have a nice big fat break between 1 and 3, and then back into my work time. And these bursts allow me to be really effective and really efficient, but the state of recalibration and reset, like you said before, you went and took your break in between the podcast to be in the mountains, and not in the mountains, but looking at the mountains and looking at the bald eagle and having time to connect with nature and have your stillness moments was so important for us as a society.
I love this. I want to ask you about state because I operate, people listen to the podcast are going to laugh, but I always like quantify myself. Like I live in like tweetables for my brain that are like reminders to me of like how to be obedient or faithful or be in these things. And one of the ones that I said that resonated so deeply with everybody is that our perspective is the difference between our prison and our power. But our perspective is dictated by our state. And you made such a valid point in your coaching and leadership and speaking about the importance of our state, right? Not being in fight or flight all the time or reactivity. And I think it's underestimated the power of a state change and also how simple it is to change that state, to change our perspective. And so from your side, who's somebody who like helps corporations and companies and coaches people on conscious leadership, can you just unpack state, like what you mean by state and how people can start to utilize that state and the power of it?
Yeah, we're very, very early stages. So the early stages of understanding vibrational resonance of a human and the influence that that has on the laws of manifestation and attraction came out early days, 1920s, with Napoleon Hill, Think and Grow Rich. And then we sort of went further into things as we started to get The Secret and things like that. And now we're really getting into this, with Joe Dispenza and people like that, into this whole understanding of your resonance, your emanation of a frequency, which becomes part of your event horizon field, your sphere of influence, being part of and a major factor in what it is you're going to call into your life. And when I work with large companies, I was speaking with a company the other day that were looking to book me for me to do some work with them. And I asked them in the preluding conversation, what are your current strategies that you have for stress management for your staff? And she kind of squirmed in the chair and looked a bit sheepish. And she says, well, look, I mean, we've got a bowl of M&Ms that they grab in between meetings. I'm like, colored chocolates as your form of strategy to get them into state. Look, state is the feeling that you're in. Really, ultimately, that's what it is. It's the feeling that you're in. And we've got measurable frequencies now, from guilt and shame and anger and fear all the way up to love, peace, and enlightenment. We've got 20, 30, 40 hertz, which are really low vibrations, which a lot of the world's currently in right now. We've got really high vibrations, which is love, peace, love being 500, peace being 600, enlightenment 700, which are measurable frequencies. And for us to have really beautiful, luscious, successful, effortless and free-flowing lives, we want to manifest that type of reality in our external world, but we have to be in that inner world first to get to create that in our outer world. A lot of people thinking, if I can just get this happening in my life, if I can just get that happening in my life, if I can just get this happening in my life, then in here we'll start getting into those higher vibrations. But it's actually the other way around. And this is where I think ritual comes in. Ritual is, and really, you're walking out the door to look at the bald eagle was part of your daily ritual to recalibrate your state. And ritual, there's a saying, rituals remind us. And that's something for me.
That's good.
When I was in Bali just last week, looking at the beautiful Balinese and their rituals on a daily basis of doing their temple ceremony and their morning blessings, and even grace before dinner is a ritual for me. Meditation, incense, lighting a candle, my evening ritual before bed. So always having certain rituals, I think, are really important processes and strategies. And I don't really use the word ritual when I'm working with large organizations like Amazon or Boston, but what I'm doing is giving them steps and processes to help them recalibrate their state and get out of overwhelm and out of stress and out of anxiety and out of fear.
There is so much in there to unpack. And I love the rituals remind us. And like, speaking of Bali, what I also love is how unapologetic they are, because you will be in Bali and you'll be walking down the street, scooters everywhere, noise, traffic, tourists, and then they will unapologetically follow that ritual. People will be walking by them, taking pictures of them, and it's like they don't even exist because they're so committed to their rituals. It's like one of the most beautiful things that I've ever witnessed. I was on a walk in Bali at because I couldn't sleep because the 14-hour time difference at 2 a.m. And I'm going for a run and I'm like, no one's going to be awake. And then I come up the street to a temple and there are 50 men ceremonially preparing a meal for a wedding that's happening 12 hours later. And they are the happiest, most go lucky. They invited me to the wedding. And I was like, I'm just this white dude walking around Bali. And it was the most beautiful thing, but they are unapologetic about it. And I love your distinction too of not even using rituals, but they're a process that remind us. They're containers or bumpers that we put into place that help us change our state. And I wanna kind of hit almost the skeptic lens, because I used to be I don't need that. I can just hustle myself, right? And now I'm the guy who has more rituals and practices than ever before. But for the person, because I hear it of I don't have time to do that, or it doesn't really matter. I'm just going to work through this. And to your point about our internal state, it doesn't shift outside of us. No matter how many results you create, it starts to shift inside of us. And so what do you say, or what are some of the easy ways? Because I think a lot of times, I remember when I was learning about this and did a Joe event and Tony Robbins and all these things, it almost felt too simple that I disregarded it and disrespected it. And then as I started to really use it and unpack it, it changed my perspective. And I know there's a lot of people thinking of yeah, but I can't. I'm at this. I have this meeting. I have this X. I have this Y. And I think state changes are really powerful. So I would kind of love your perspective or your guidance on how people can start to operate in this way and things that they can do to change that state and really change from the inside out.
Yeah, there's so many different things we can do on a daily basis. In fact, really start thinking about, for me, it's almost like my life is a ritual. So for this morning, a classic example, it's 9 a.m. now. My morning ritual was to do some stretching first. I like to my first thing I do when I wake up is I scrape my tongue. So it's an ancient Ayurvedic practice using stainless steel or copper tongue scrapers. And that cleans the bacteria off my tongue. Obviously, I brush my teeth, and then I have a large glass of warm water with either apple cider vinegar or some hydrolytes to replenish my body. So these are all kind of things that I do ritualistic on a daily basis, but part of my health and well-being strategy so that I'm in peak performance physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. These are my 4 things that I'm really putting as the key striving points to my life. Am I in peak performance mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually? So after I've done that, then I do my stretching, and then I'll do some meditation, and I'll probably do some gratitude and journaling. And these are kind of sometimes I'll go to the gym. Today it's pouring with rain, or I'll go for a walk or a run, but some sort of physical movement as well as stretching and meditation. But my morning routine is normally between, and this is not to freak people out, but between, it can be 2 to 3 hours. Sometimes if I'm running short on things, it might be down to 20 minutes, but there's definitely always a prelude to that form of activity of my working day. And then you've got your lunchtime routine, breakfast routine, and these sort of rituals there. It could be grace or some gratitude, some acknowledgement or recognition that you're blessed to be actually having this experience. My evening routine is winding down before bed, which would be some stretching, maybe lighting a candle or some reading, and turning off all technology or electronics and things like that. You might try some abhyanga, which is a little beautiful sesame oil massage or coconut oil massage you do before bed to calm your nervous system. There's so many different things that we can do, some breath work, some meditation. So it really is finding the tools that work best for you and integrating them consistently throughout your day as steps and processes for your internal recalibration, but also integrating your and enhancing your relationship with the external world, the sun, the moon, the wind, the food that you're eating, the fresh water that's coming out of your tap, and realizing that you're part of an sort of integrated relationship that's happening with nature, and you coexist in this world with nature. But the rituals can help remind us that, because we get caught up in our heads and caught up in our desires, and we forget all of that.
I love it, because I know you can speak to the amount of studies that have been done about gratitude, and just like, I'm grateful for the sun and I'm grateful for this food, and like it changes our state. And earlier, I want to ask you about it, because I want to tie it together. You were talking about Tom time, which I love, by the way. Everybody listening, your homework after this episode is to create insert first name here time, or come up with an analogy. Don't use Tom. If you want to use Tom, it was like MySpace Tom, right? It was like MySpace Tom. Everybody was friends with him. Everybody loved him, right? You just might be the new MySpace Tom, and we can call it Tom time and fully credit you. And then everyone's going to DM you on Instagram and be like, thank you for my Tom time, right? So use his Instagram as accountability. His Instagram is Tom Cronin, Cronin, but create your Tom time. And I loved how you also talked about it in the lens of these rituals, and our whole day is a ritual, right? And it's really about priming our state at the beginning of the day, but then throughout the day, intentionally coming back to that state. Because to our previous point, we live in a world and a culture where it's constantly competing for our attention, right? It's trying to take us off of ourselves. And it isn't just I do it in the morning as like a checkbox. It's like, hey, anytime I'm feeling off or feeling reactive or not in control of my emotions, or I'm ruminating, or I'm doom scrolling, right? Or any of those things that come up, they're almost like an invitation to plug in to one of these rituals. And these rituals are the bumpers or the protective measures that we have, if we can schedule them into our day, that don't allow us to get too far from that, best state and that rested state. And so I just loved your distinction of like, not only is it in the morning, and then I take, my Tom time from 1 to 3. And then, when I'm done with my day, it's like you're preparing to get on the field that day. And when you're on the field, you get tackled a few times. And, a flat tire happens. You're like, okay, cool. It happened. And I can use gratitude. I can use a ritual. I can use some Tom time to reset my state, to then choose how I go navigate this next part of my day. But it's really an active choice, right? It's not something that happens by accident. And so I don't know if I had a question as much as I had a summary and a statement, because they've heard me on this podcast teach them. I tell them, I was like, there's 4 core areas for me and for you. And it's my heart, my mind, my body, and my business. But I have to earn the right to touch my business every day. And I'm like, so in the morning I get up and I do my heart, I do my mind, I move my body. And then when these are complete, I've had my George time, and then I know I'm in the right state to hit my business. But then I even have an SOS model of like, when I'm being reactive, how do I reset? And it's a state change model. And so it's been one of the most powerful things for me, even when I used to resist the structure. So you're not going to tell me. I just want to go with the flow, right? I want to let it happen. And every time I let it happen, I'd end up on Netflix or YouTube or doom scrolling on my phone, or going to bed at 9 p.m. and 2 hours later, I'm still watching Instagram. And I'm like, oh, if I just read my Bible, I'd be asleep by now. Mm-hmm. And it's like this never ending cycle because of the attention. So I guess it was more of a statement than it was a question, but any thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. Quite fascinatingly, the CEO of Netflix said at one of their AGMs, their annual general meeting, that they had four main competitors: YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and sleep. And so they see sleep as a competitor to them, because it's taking people away from their eyeballs on their TV shows. And these things are like wedges that are trying to penetrate into your mindscape, into your daily routines, into your rituals. And Snapchat, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. And I don't know if you've heard of Tristan Harris. He was a whistleblower that was meant to be one of the moral officers or the ethics officers. He started off, I think he was at YouTube, he was at Snapchat, but he actually became a whistleblower, walked out of the industry. And it got a little bit precarious for him. He had to go into hiding because he was blowing the whistle on these companies that didn't have any ethics. They knew that they were specifically setting up their systems to do everything they can to steal the eyeballs of young children, 16-year-olds, 12-year-olds, and that there was reckless abandon of that because they knew, coming back to our very early discussion on the Bhutanese, that they were prioritizing economics over well-being. And this is the problem with the world. And I think a lot of people listening will probably know that we're seeing this happening in the way we're doing farming, the way we're doing pharmaceuticals, the way we're doing fast food, the way we're doing social media, is that we generally prioritize economics over well-being, unfortunately, in a lot of our economic models. And that's coming at a huge cost.
I see it running rampant in entrepreneurship, because the same way that those platforms and competitors exist to steal your attention, most of the industries that we're in are constantly like, your business isn't big enough. You don't have enough employees. You don't have enough clients. You don't have X. You're not working hard enough. And it ends up creating that same thing where the economics of that basically pull us out of the life that we're supposedly running our business to live. And then we fall into that trap that you said earlier. Well, when the business hits 7 figures, I'll take a vacation. Or when I bring in 3 more employees, I'll change my schedule. Or if I get 5 more clients, then I'll start working out again. And we become a product, almost like a byproduct or a victim of our own businesses because of the same concept. And we end up sacrificing ourselves, our health, our happiness, our relationships in the pursuit of this thing externally. And then we end up with neither.
Yeah.
We never get the business that we want. And then we don't have any of the people that were on the journey with us. And to your point earlier, we've isolated ourselves.
We can never actually get there in the world that we're striving for, that we've been conditioned and told we should strive for. We'll never get there. And I know that definitively because this has happened many times, but I'll give you one example. I was contacted by a gentleman who was originally living in Australia and sold his business for $350 million. I won't say much about the business because it'll give a bit of an idea about who that person is. But he was extremely successful, and he was never going to be able to spend that amount of money in the rest of his life, as far as, you know, using that for his own well-being and happiness. But he gave it a good nudge, and he contacted me. He'd bought a $50 million house on the Amalfi Coast in Italy, which was his ultimate dream. He had a wife and 2 kids and a garage full of extremely luxurious cars. He had butlers, maids, cooks, cleaners. And he contacted me because his mate had suggested you should talk to Tom. He said, I don't understand it. I've got everything I could possibly have. And I've never felt as angry, anxious, and depressed as I am today. What is going on? And I said, well, the reason being is that you've done everything that you were told to do and you haven't been able to find happiness. And the problem with that is that you've looked for it in a place that it doesn't exist. The acquisition and experiences of life cannot provide us with sustainable, lasting happiness. We've seen this time and time again. It's time for you to start looking inward. And that's when he became a meditation student of mine. He came on my retreats and started to finally stabilize an internal state. Again, this coming back to our state, we were talking about recalibrating and recognizing your state is primary and what you're doing with that state secondary. And so he'd been doing the secondary thing, which is, can I get all those things that I should be getting? And then hopefully that will change my state, but it's just not going to do it. And so, that was, I've seen that time and time again with very wealthy people come to me who've had very great deals of success with their businesses and yet not realize that they couldn't get their state out of that. And so, helping them to recalibrate from the inner world.
I also just have to echo something you said, because I don't want to let it get passed by. And it was so powerful. Like, the first priority is navigating and building your internal state. The second priority is choosing what you do with that state.
Yeah.
And that's like, 50 years of life wisdom boiled down into like 3 sentences, but it's such a powerful distinction that I didn't want to let it go. But I actually think this is a good place to transition, because, you've been speaking about meditation and you being a meditation teacher. And I'm curious, like, innately, as a person who's like, I would listen to you by a campfire all day, and I can't wait, because I'm gonna be bothering you a ton. Get ready for the DMs.
Hopefully we have
like,
a campfire
what about this,
in
Tom?
Montana,
What about
because I want to
this?
come to Montana one day.
Oh, brother, you're coming to Montana. I will take you up to all my favorite stillness spots,
Beautiful.
my sitting spots, the river views. It's absolutely gorgeous. But, you had this whole career in the outside state, right? And then felt unfulfilled in like 26 years. Like, what was the pivotal moment for you where you were like, I can't do this anymore, and you started to kind of come in and find these tools?
It's the analogy I like to use is when the French are cooking frogs in their cuisine. What they do is they put the frog in cold water, and the frog's kind of quite happy there because it's its natural environment. And then they're slowly heating the water up, and the frog, being quite adaptable and chameleon-like, will slowly adapt to its environment, and it's adapting and adapting to its environment, not realizing what's going on. And then it gets to this point where it just literally dies very peacefully in the hot water. And that was kind of happening to me without realizing it. I'd been a broker in finance. I was actually meant to go to university to write, become a journalist and write articles about capitalistic greed, funnily enough. And I'd been backpacking around Europe, listening to the Smiths and Susie and the Banshees and reading French existentialists like Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus, and thought I was a pretty cool hippie at the age of 18. And I got back and had about 3, 4, 5 months to fill in before university started. So I just applied to a bunch of jobs in the paper. And next thing, I landed a career. Well, at the time, it was a short-term job before I went to university to make some money. And it was on a trading room floor. And this was the same year that Jordan Belfort started his career, 1987, The Wolf of Wall Street. And I walked into a trading room floor of 150 guys yelling and screaming, trading currencies, swaps, bonds, bank bills on international markets. And it was so exciting. I just was blown away by the energy and the adrenaline. And surprisingly, I was actually really good at the job. And before long, I ended up being pulled into that vortex of hedonism, narcissism, and large amounts of money. And I thought it was extremely exciting. And not before long, I was drinking alcohol every day, doing drugs nearly every day, and caught into the whole culture of that in the late 80s, early 90s. And I didn't realize that I was slowly developing some serious mental health issues. I was slowly developing a really deep, dark depression. And this eventually culminated into a full-blown nervous breakdown at the age of 27, 28. And it was a really bleak time in my life, but it was actually also the time that I came across the universe really divinely organized this for me. I feel it was like a divine intervention where I was having mental health leave it from work. I couldn't go to work. I had to take some absence. And I was watching TV, and they were interviewing on this documentary about success and business, property developer. And I was into success and business and making money, of course. And he was talking about how he used meditation as a tool for his success. And he used the word transcendental meditation. And it was like a light bulb moment. I was like, and they showed him while they were doing the voiceover, him sitting in a suit, meditating in a chair. And I'm like, it was like these two worlds had just collided of, spirituality and monks and meditation. Yet there was this businessman in a suit sitting in a chair, not lotus and mudras and robes and shaved head. And so it really became extremely appealing for me. And that's when I started my exploration into mindfulness, meditation, and Eastern philosophy. And it was an absolute game changer for me.
Wow. You know what? That's the second time in 3 days I've heard the frog analogy, and it lands so deeply because it resonates the same with me, to the point where I had all the success. I was a New York Times bestseller, #1 app in the world. I had millions of followers on social media. And then I ended up in the jungles of Costa Rica with a shaman who wouldn't let me partake and participate because I was telling him I was paying him money to find that inner peace. And he's like, you don't get to come see me until you have that inner peace and a purpose. And I went through the same thing, but it was this byproduct of falling into it and then trying to keep up with it and the diminishing returns. And it was just never enough and never enough. And super similar, which is why I relate so much to you speaking. And I want to ask you too, because even in the beginning of this show and using, the Bhutanese government and happiness, we've been talking a lot about like the stress and the demand for attention and, Netflix, by the way, mind blowing that sleep is one of their top competitors. We're bombarded with all this noise and all these distractions. And I think for me personally, as somebody who meditates, now I call it my stillness practice, my prayers, my secret place, with the Lord. My biggest challenge was all my misconceptions around it. Like I didn't even understand what it was. And I thought I was doing it wrong or there's no way I could do that. So I would love to like hear your thoughts on like, what is meditation? Like, what are the misconceptions and like, how can people overcome those so they can start to utilize it as a tool?
Yeah, there's so many different ways people would consider themselves as meditating. My mum used to have this ride-on mower, and she used to find that her time for meditating, which was really just being present. Another friend of mine say, I meditate when I swim in the pool and do laps. It's very meditative doing laps in a pool. Or someone else might say, I do jogging in the morning. That's my meditation. And not to discredit or discourage them from what they're doing as a tool for finding some degree of presence in their day and getting out of their head. It could be dance, it could be pottery, it could be weaving. For me, I guess there's many different ways that we can meditate, from visualizations to gratitude to just looking at nature and being present. For me, what I teach predominantly is a structured form of meditation using mantras that have a specific quality about them. These are what we call bij mantras. Bij is a Sanskrit word that means seed, which you plant underneath the surface of the ground. And so the bij mantra lures and attracts the mind away from the stimuli and excitation of the outside world, which is where our mind is continuously going, future, past, or present. And it lures the mind inward, away from forms and phenomenon, and away from the gross world into the subtler and subtler until we get to what's called the subtlest world. The subtlest world is the world beyond form. It's beyond time, space, and matter, and beyond duality, which is subject and object relativity. You, the subject, the ego, the identity, relating to the object, which could be something that happened in the past or the future or even in the present. And this dualistic relationship that we're having between the subject and object is a dynamic of excitation and stimulation. That's why we listen to Spotify, why we eat ice cream, and why we watch Netflix, is because we want those things in the object world, the world of form and phenomenon, to impact and stimulate the subject, which is our inner state of feeling. Now, to transcend that is to go beyond the duality into the non-dual, where there's just consciousness itself. Now, what happens when we transcend that dualistic world? Two things happen. One is we get into an incredibly profound state of deep restfulness, where our mind is no longer active, yet we're still awake and conscious. So this is a really deep state of metabolic rest. It's profoundly deep and very healing for the body. And one analogy I like to use here is that if we want to heal a broken leg, we put a cast around it. Now, the cast is not fixing the leg at all. What the cast is doing is creating stillness to allow the intelligence within the body to do what it does best, which is heal. And so meditation, first and foremostly, provides stillness in the physiology that's deeper than sleep to allow the body to start healing. So all my agoraphobia, anxiety, insomnia, depression, anxiety, panic attacks, no doctor could really ultimately heal that. But what my body could do when I created deep rest from that meditation was it allowed the body to start healing itself. And that was one of the profound things that I noticed that was the biggest shift for me, was the healing that happened. But secondly, we start accessing that field, and some would call it God, source, or the unbounded, or the eternal, the infinite, the non-change, the permanent. And that state is an absolutely critical state for us as humans to start experiencing, because without that, we're missing the key component of what it is to be alive.
That cast analogy, I'm totally stealing it, and I'm giving you full credit.
That's all yours.
I am giving you full credit. That is the best visualization and metaphor or story that I've ever heard that explains it so profoundly and so powerfully. And yeah, that summarizes like 15 years of my life down into like why I'm so bullish about my practices now, or my stillness practice, or, you know, my prayer. That analogy is really, really powerful. And I kind of want to play, I'm like envisioning where I was at the beginning of this journey, where I was like, oh yeah, it's fine, right? Like maybe I'll meditate when I schedule it in, or I go to this retreat, you know. But one of the things that I really struggled with was that I was doing it right or wrong, right? So to your point of the cast, I didn't realize at the beginning, when I started to put a cast and create that space, my mind was going to try to get me out of it, because I was constantly thinking. It was racing all the time. And it felt like the only time I could ever like reach that state was if I was forced into it, like a float tank, right? Or a facilitated breathwork session. But it wasn't like in 10 minutes, it was like 2 hours later. And it would always pull me out of it, because I'm like, I'm thinking about this. And it felt like I couldn't like quiet my mind. So I felt like I was doing it wrong. Right. Do you have any like advice for people? Like, cause I can think right now of 10 clients that I'm coaching that are always like, when I force them, and I do it with love, I'm like, we're going to sit still. And they're like, I can't stop thinking about this. I just like, I'm not doing it right. I'm doing it wrong. I would kind of love your perspective on that for people, because it feels like it's a process to me, and one that gets, to your point, deeper and deeper and deeper. But I would love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, firstly, I think understanding, coming back to the cast analogy, the cast is a very rigid framework that is trying to create a parameter around something that doesn't want to be still. You know, we want to keep moving the leg because it's fun. You don't want to go play soccer or do something. So it's like, no, we're going to create a framework that will stop this movement from happening. And so firstly, I think it's really important to create a framework for your meditation. So it's going to be X many minutes. I'm going to be sitting in this chair, and I'm not going to be getting distracted during this time. And so that's the first point of framework, is your time and the location. The second framework for me is, if we just create that framework, but then just sit, now the mind is going to need another framework inside the mind. And the mind traditionally wants to think, is designed for thinking, and thinking is in the future and the past. Excuse me. And this is a tendency of the mind. We call them vasanas. The mind has these patterns, neurological patterns of thought. And it's doing this 30, 40, 50,000 times a day. So I find that having a trained process for meditation makes it a lot easier. And that's where the mantras come in. And this is what I teach with Vedic meditation. Other people consider it transcendental meditation. And we use these particular resonances or vibrations to entice the mind away from thought and lure it into the realm of bliss. So what happens when the mind discovers the bliss of being, by default, it drops the thinking process. The thinking becomes superseded by something more charming than thinking, and that's the bliss of being. Being is very blissful, but the mind doesn't naturally know how to get there. So we need a blissful lure, which is the mantra, to entice and inspire the mind away from the external world of charm and to the most charming of all realms, which is the bliss of being. And in that transcendent state, the mind spontaneously lets go of thought and spontaneously lets go of the mantra, because the superseding of the charm of thought and mantra has been gazumped by the bliss of being. It's such a palpable experience that the mind spontaneously drops into that space. Now, without that, you're going to need force. This is hatha, the force of the elephant, to force the mind to stop thinking. So this is where we're going to use concentration and effort and trying and discipline and diligence. Again, that's a different style of meditation that usually is used in monasteries and ashrams, where there's not so much, charming propositions around them. They remove themselves from those distractions, forcefully creating a container of a monastery to be something that stops them from being pulled into the world of charm and pleasure. So again, it comes down to what your preference is, I guess, to your type of practice that you want to go with.
Yeah, and I would love your thoughts too on like the word practice, because what I've learned is it's a muscle, and the more I use it, the easier it is to get into that state, right? But then like the more infrequently or inconsistent I am with it. And so is it something that you found that, you know, being intentional and like using our rituals as a reminder, but using it consistently is what makes it more accessible for us and really gets us to tune in faster?
Yeah, definitely consistency is critical. It's like if you've got a muscle that's in atrophy because, again, coming back to the cast, it's been in a cast for a long time. Let's just say your bicep was in a cast, and it's been there for 6 months and it's atrophied. It's lost its strength. And then we go to the gym and we lift one dumbbell once, and then we look at the muscle and go, well, it hasn't really done much. You know, it really struggled with that. But if we go every day, just increasing and developing and lifting and going back diligently, what we're going to find is that it's going to continue to get better and better and better. And I think this is what our practice is like. It really needs consistency. It needs recurring diligence, and it needs to be ongoing. So when we say consistency, we're talking about your entire life. So for me, my practice is my life.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Yeah, it's like chop wood, carry water. It reminds me, I've read all of Thich Nhat Hanh's books, and I love him. And there was this moment where I was like reading the book, and you made a point earlier about, you know, our thoughts are like anxiety and depression. You talk about this state of being and the bliss that comes. And I remember, like, I have a son who's 8.5, and there's these moments where I'll like come to and realize I didn't remember like the last 30 minutes of the tickle fight or the running around the yard, right? It was just like pure bliss. And then the moment I start thinking about it, I'm no longer in it anymore. And I wrote this down one day and I said, the moment you recognize you are, you no longer are, because now I'm thinking about what I experienced or what I'm not experiencing instead of actually experiencing what is still directly in front of me. Like he's still standing in front of me asking me to tickle him, but something like pulled me out of it. And the way that you described that, like reminded me of that. And I love the distinction. And I want to go back like a couple minutes, because I want to go to your example of the man in the 3-piece suit in the chair meditating, right? And how meditation was, quite frankly, responsible or supportive in success. And I think a lot of the times people have them like mutually exclusive, right? Where it's like, well, I can't do that until I'm successful. Like, how could me sitting still or how could me meditating lead to more success? How could me, you know, not working or hustling and taking the time to like plug in and change my state lead to more success? And you have a lot of experience with this. And so I would kind of love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, firstly, I want to preface this by saying that if you start meditating, it doesn't mean you're going to become extremely successful and rich. You know, the universe might give you things that you might not necessarily want or have planned, but it might be what you need. And, you know, I've had some difficult times when I started meditating, and it wasn't what I wanted and it wasn't what I planned, but it was kind of what the universe kind of had to give to me to kind of kick my butt a little bit and have me realize some things. So firstly, I just want to preface that it's not a guarantee that all of a sudden your life is going to be this beautiful bed of roses with a bank balance full of $250 million. The universe might want you to have to experience something that you need to experience that might not be in your planned schedule. So that's kind of like, was like, oh, okay, this is a whole other ball game here, living this path and walking this life. But what thing I've found is that when we start to reassess what our core values are, and when we start to reassess why we do what we do, and what I like to come back to is the Vedic principles that there's two forms of happiness. There's outcome-oriented happiness, which is one that we extract and commoditize out of action and acquisitions. And it's very fleeting, it's unsustainable, and it leads to potentially a dependency on outcomes and acquisitions to be a source of fulfillment, which isn't ultimately very healthy for us as a society. And I think it's one of the catalysts for our major problems that we're seeing on the planet. And then we also have sustained internal fulfillment, and this is the state of being, and the quality of being is bliss, and we need to stabilize that where it becomes our daily experience regardless of the outcomes and acquisitions. And interestingly, it's twofold what happens when we start to stabilize being, or the bliss of being inside of us. This is called turiya in Sanskrit, the fourth state, beyond deep sleep, dream state, and waking state. We've got this other state, which others might say we've got physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual reality. So this fourth component of our existence is a critical one, and one that most humans are falling short of having the experience of. But when we have this consistent recurring daily practice and we stabilize the bliss of being as the foundation to our reality, then what happens is action becomes an expression from fulfillment, not action for fulfillment. So for most people, they're going into action for fulfillment, to extract fulfillment from the action. Whereas when we've already stabilized fulfillment and then we have action from fulfillment is very different action than action for fulfillment. And this is where we go into a lot more of service and action becoming something that is an expression of our fulfillment that we want to give to the world in some way.
That was so good. I love that. And I also love the disclaimer, because ditto. I mean, even for me as like a man of faith, like I go into these moments and I pray, and I joke with people that oftentimes I pray for things that I don't have the character and scars to maintain yet. And then it presents me and I'm like, why is this so crystal clear to me? No, that is not the road. That is not what I asked for. That is not what it's supposed to look like. That's a very hard conversation. That is a big feeling. But then it's like the path just magically unlocks. And on the other side of it leads to your point, which is like this fulfillment and pride and peace of like going through it. Because I found the more that I quiet, the more I create space for my unconscious mind to show up, which knows everything, even though logically I'm convincing myself that I have it all figured out. And it's turned into something that I personally, and I don't know if anybody listening can resonate this or even with you, in the beginning for me, these practices, like my stillness practice, like it wasn't by force. It was something I was choosing to do, but it almost felt like something I had to do. And then I was afraid of the things. And over time, as I like walked through them and flexed that muscle, then it kind of became something I got excited to go uncover, where I'm like, oh, there's more in here. Okay. And on the other side of this is progress. And I get to feel more fulfilled and like a better father or a better coach or a better entrepreneur, or have more joy in it. And it definitely shifted over time. But to your previous point, or what I said, it was the consistency to the practice, but also being unattached to kind of what came up and going into it. I think for me, and I would ask you a question, but it's more of a statement, is I almost had to learn how to be curious again and not be self-judgmental, right? Or self-damning. And a lot of the times I would see these things or feel these things, right? Where I joke, where I'm like, I didn't wake up this morning to go into meditation and then be like, here's the thought I want you to plant. Like, it's coming from somewhere. But in the beginning, it would come up with like fault or blame or guilt or shame. But then what I realized, it was, to our analogy about the bicep, it was almost like, hey, here's the things that I want, that I'm praying for or trying to manifest. And here's the workout plan that's being handed to me to follow, to have those things. And then once I started to kind of shift the way I saw it, it became this like excitement for me, but I needed this curiosity in it, where it was more so like, okay, got it, right? Like, I'm imperfect as a human. We all are, right? But this is an opportunity. And so that's what it was like for me. So that lands very much.
I really love the use of the word curiosity. I think one of the biggest freedoms that we ever discover and experience is when we truly deeply learn to trust the process. And we can change these words for different ways of expressing this, but trusting God, or trusting the process, trusting that divine intelligence, trusting that everything that's happening in some way, shape, or form is like a maternal guidance force that is supporting me in some way, shape, or form to be better, to discover my truth. And it might not be a lesson that we want, just as school sometimes isn't something we want to go to. But being able to really start to see that intelligence and have gratitude for it. Thank you, God, for giving me this experience. Thank you for taking me through this journey. And for me now, learning that everything that's happening is this beautiful interwoven intelligence that's some way guiding me along the way, and the trust in that, the curiosity in that, the fascination. I remember one friend of mine, he lost his house in the fires, and it wasn't the Palisade fires, it was a couple of years before that one, somewhere in Malibu, and they lost everything. They lost everything, and before that, he'd been through another difficult time in a relationship that he was in, and he said, he's learned to smile at the universe and go, "Is that it? Like, how amazing." And he said, just to grin and say with a mild fascination, "Is that all there is? Come on, isn't there anything else?" And just to move through all of these experiences with this freedom. And he said, "Now I'm free, because I don't see this as like I've been victimized, or I've been, something, I'm a bad person because this is happening to me, but to really be free in it all."
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's kind of became in similar circumstances, but then it took me years to realize that the situation had already happened. So the only thing that was changing was my relationship to it, and that relationship dictated what followed, right? And it was almost like this self-created prison of like this victim mentality of like, oh, this happened to me, this happened to me. I'm like, but the thing already happened. And if I choose the empowering, the gratitude, the thank you for this, like thank you for the opportunity, there's something on the other side of this, it just makes it a whole lot easier to walk through the aftermath per se and create something out of it, right? And it took me years to recognize that even in the moments I dwelled and I was like, boohoo me, boohoo me, boohoo me, eventually I got to this place where I'm like, it's still not changing. And I would shift to gratitude, and then all of a sudden opportunities would show up. And I'm like, so if I just shorten that gap, and when it happens, go to like, oh, I'm so grateful, it's just making it a whole lot easier, smoother, and faster to have the results that are already coming. And so that's something that resonates deeply with me
Yeah, I
too.
love what you're saying there about how it changes what happens on the horizon, because the past is what we're relating to. But by changing the way we're relating to the past, we change what we're calling in, because we're changing, again, coming back to what we've been talking a lot about, which seems to be a theme, which is beautiful, is the state. We're changing our state because our state is normally affected by our past. Now, I want to also preface and be a little bit humble here, because there are things in my life that I'm still coming to reconcile with. So I just want people to know that I'm not kind of all of a sudden some enlightened monk, that I have no negative relationship with the past. There's stuff that is so deep and something that I'm still working my way through in that pure relinquishing and freedom from the relationship to that, because I just want people to understand that if you're grappling with something that was really big and powerful in your life, maybe you're abused or you had something unpleasant happen, it's not easy to suddenly just go, oh, I'm free from that. I can see there's a message in that and there's a lesson and I'm all good with that. It's like sometimes this trauma can be so deep in our bodies that somatically, physiologically, it's going to take some time for that to come out. Intellectually, you might have this thing, oh, I'm grateful for that experience. I'm so glad that happened to me. And I don't have any negative association with that. I just want to let people know it's okay if it's still difficult for you, and that you can't suddenly just listen to this podcast and be free from some traumatic experience that you've been through. It's not that easy. And I want you to know that that's okay. To not beat yourself up, that it's taking some time for you to get some sense of solace with that.
I actually am really grateful that you shared that, because the longer I've been in this work, the more humble I've become, because there is no finish line to any of it. But I had somebody the other day reframe this. We were talking about personal development, and we were talking about trauma, and it's like, trauma happens, right? Our body's going to have a reaction to it. The tools in this work doesn't change the situation, but it changes your perspective and recovery time drastically. And to our analogy of the gym, it's that when things happen or when those moments come back up, in my experience, the response gap is shorter, but I'm also equipped with the tools to be able to navigate it instead of allowing it to take over the steering wheel of my life and drive me deeper into like self-sabotaging behaviors or into situations that would exacerbate it more. And so, even for me, I'm open about this. Like, I've been going through divorce and figuring out how to co-parent my son, and, business change and life changed. And there's parts of me and there's times where I'm just like, can I just hit an easy button? And then it's like, oh, no. you've done the work, right? Like you have the tools, but as my son's favorite book when he was a kid was Bear Through the Woods. You can't go over it. You can't go under it. You can't go around it. You get to go through it. And I'm like, but I'm equipped to go through it. And so it's just to catch it and go through it. And over time, there's moments that used to really trigger me, like a lot, from the military and the combat and the suicides and all these things. And now I have conversations about those moments with gratitude and appreciation and love. And I was like, but it wasn't, to your point, instant. It was every single time it came up, changing my state. And now I've realized that at this point in my life, I do it 100 times more than I ever used to keep that muscle growing and that muscle strong. And so I'm actually really glad that you shared that, because I think that that's something I forget to talk about all the time, because I default to just being like, here's what I do and here's how I do it. And then what I don't have is like, you know, before this podcast, when I went on that walk outside and I looked at the mountains, I cried because I had moments from calls earlier and I was like, oh, but it's this beautiful moment of release. And then my state changes and I come back to do the podcast. And there's times I forget to share the inner workings of that process, right? I just tend to share the process. So I'm really grateful that you shared that.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that's really important in this whole new, I guess it's been really 5 to 10 years maximum of this spiritual expansion and spiritual knowledge and faith-based discussions that are starting to emerge, because we now have the ability to do them on podcasts and on YouTube and on TikTok and Instagram. But there is a tendency for us to share the good bits and tend to, oops, I forgot to mention, it's really tough at times. And even as spiritual guides and teachers and faith-based leaders, it's very easy for us to be on the pulpit or on the stage or on the podcast and share all the good stuff. But I think, you know, coming back to the analogy, if my arm has been in a cast and there's atrophy in the muscle and the cast is now taken off, and I look at my muscle and go, gosh, this is atrophied. I can't believe this has happened to me. This is so bad that this has happened. But I don't do anything about it, then that atrophy is going to stay there. So there is difficult times, but that's the times that we're doing the work, we're doing the lifting, and we're doing the things that are developing. So again, it is going to be difficult. It is going to be challenging. But if you've got the tools, if you've got the people around you, if you've got the support, then we have to just still get down to the nitty gritty and actually do the work as well. And that sometimes is going to be tough. It's going to be hard and it's going to be brutal sometimes. But, you know, my retreats, it's really hard to sell my retreats because people go through all sorts of challenging experiences on my retreats. It's like, you never told me that this was going to happen. It's like, yeah, I can't sell that. No one's going to pay for it. But at the end of it, they're like, oh my God, I'm so glad I went through that. That was amazing. So
we might be the same person. It's the running joke where when I do my 2-3 events a year where it's business, but it's also the person and this stuff and work and like releasing. And they're like, I can sell it. I was like, totally, come. And they're like mad at me for a day or two. And then by day 3, we're all hugging. And they're like, this was the best thing ever. I'm like, now how do you sell that? They're like, you can't tell people.
No.
You can't. And I'm like, okay. So like, I share that with you wholeheartedly. Like we are brothers in that game.
People ask me, you know,
like,
can you tell me more about what we're going to be doing? They said, not really.
Yeah.
You'll feel amazing.
And they're like, I thought this was a customer journey event. I'm like, it is, but the most important customer is you.
Yeah.
Because your state dictates the results of your clients and your team. And they're like, oh, you tricked me. I'm like, no, I love you. And I'm in it with you. And so I resonated deeply with what you just shared.
Yeah.
And now I know what it feels like though, because my friends like you that facilitate, like, you want to come to the event? I'm like, yep, don't tell me anything. I'm coming in, but I have that like slight edge. I'm like, oh man, what practice have I not done that I am about to do that's going to put me in the rocker or right on that razor's edge? And I get excited for it, but I still get nervous.
Yeah.
I still get nervous.
Yeah, for sure. Rightfully so.
I want to start to land the plane, but I also, you said something earlier about, you know, having the tools and having the retreats and having things that I just wanted to presence as well. You also talked about having the community. And I think in even conversations about this work or things that somebody might be experiencing or feeling, I realized that my biggest downfall for so long was the isolation that I created in this process. And I feel like the most powerful aspect of this is community, whether it's, you know, DMing you on Instagram or finding a friend to share with or to do these things with. Like, I feel like to Bhutan's point, but I think human point is that we are like tribal creatures that belong in relationships. And I think to share the good parts, we forget that none of us are exempt from this process. Some of us just share the good parts and we do it behind the scenes, but there's a lot of support in our corners, and even conversations like this are sharpening for me and supportive of me. I'll be crying later as I pray about it. I'm like, oh, this was so perfect and blessed and timely. But I just wanted to say for everybody listening that, there's massive, massive power in being connected with somebody in this and sharing and in doing these things together. And, like having somebody support you or guide you or sit with you or do any of these things with you. The community part, I think, is the most neglected part in today's society. So I just wanted to add that in as well.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, it's such an integral part, I think, of moving through life. If you look at nearly all churches have thrived and survived on community. And, I think coming together and communing, congregating, collaborating is such an integral part of us evolving as a species. I've always, as a mentor, always had mentors. You think of some of the top golfers and basketballers and, hockey players in the world have always had really good coaches around them. Even the LeBron James, you watch documentaries about these people and they're turning up with their, 3 coaches teaching them and guiding them and supporting them. One of the things that I always come back to is there's a lot of things that I don't know, which is why I'm where I am. And I need people to help me to know what I don't know. And so I think whether it's good friends or mentors or guides or spiritual leaders, just having people in your corner, in your space, and being part of a bigger collective, I think is a really important part of the journey going forward. And to not just that I tend to see consistently where people are really struggling is because more often than not, they've been struggling on their own, curled up in a ball, sitting in a room, and trying to get distracted with drugs, alcohol, gaming or something. And really when we start to invite people in, we start to see growth and change and transformation starting to happen.
That was said so well. It was said so well. And it's kind of like the perfect opportunity to say, Tom, like, where is the best place for people to connect with you?
And it's funny, we talked about this before we went live, how much we both love Instagram. I find there's something really personal about it. I know there's like TikTok, it's so hard to communicate with the community and connect with the community there. I'm still on TikTok and I do a little bit there, but same with YouTube, the messaging, there's something just missing there and in the ability for you to develop a sense of community. But Instagram seems to have nailed it where it comes to the ability to share, hey, I've just finished my breakfast. Here's a photo of me, walking down the street or whatever, in the stories, obviously, and then the posts, the reels, and then obviously the communicating and the messaging, the commenting. There's something really connectable about that. So Instagram is probably my preferred place for people, and I answer all my messages and I respond to everyone that reaches out to me. So hit me up at Instagram. I look forward to hearing from people there.
Yeah. And for everybody listening, his Instagram is Tom Cronin. So it's TomCronin. And he's very much like me. So like bombard him, blast him. And if you want to flex that muscle today, either tell him you're going to utilize Tom time, or I have a challenge for you since we've talked about community and connection and service and giving back. And I know for me, as somebody who speaks and teaches all the time, one of the greatest things that I get back is when somebody tells me that something landed or that it shifted or that it supported them. And we've been talking a lot about gratitude. So I have a stretch for everybody listening. At minimum, I will come fly through the computer and kick you in the shins with love if you don't do this. But send Tom a message and just share one thing that you're grateful for, that he shared, that you heard, that shifted your perspective. Ask a question. But I think the more we hold each other accountable and lean into this in community, the more that we can get connected with incredible people and resources. And I know personally, as a consumer of Tom's stuff, because I spent a couple hours today diving through most of his stuff, there's a lot to be gained. And so just at minimum, shoot him a message and say, thank you. Thanks for sharing. Thanks for coming on the podcast. Thanks for saying yes to the crazy dude with the pink website and pink boots that you went on his podcast. And I got to hear that, whatever it is, just something. Because I think it would mean a lot. And I think it's us all leveraging the power of community, and to tie this to the beginning, to bringing back that power of community and surrounding ourselves with like-minded people, whether it's just their essence or their resonance or their content, to build that community, to use this as reminders to stay in this work and to bring that inner peace and that inner state. And so I'm going to ask you my famous last question, and I'm really excited for this one. It's a really, really easy one. But I always like to tell my guests, I just want you to imagine that everybody listening, for whatever reason, forgot the first hour and 10 minutes of this. They don't remember anything that we said. But in this moment, whatever you say to them, they're going to tattoo on their soul and take with them forever. And so I just want to know what your tattoo wisdom is for everybody listening.
It comes and brings me to a quote from Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, one of the great spiritual leaders of our times, who says that no one needs to suffer in life because there's an ocean of bliss within everyone. And the big thing is, where is that bliss? How do we find it? Because at the moment, we're looking for it in TikTok, we're looking for it in Walmart, we're looking for it in Amazon, we're looking for it in our relationships, we're looking for it in our sports games, in our politicians. But that ocean of bliss actually is in the silence of the mind. And it's very hard to find that. That's the beautiful thing about it. The divine, the bliss, God, source, being isn't in the external world. And it's something that if we can, I love this. I'm just going to finish with this. The word listen and the word silent have the same letters. And if you move those letters around, they are actually, those two go so deeply together. To listen, we need to be silent. And that means silence of the external world, but also silence of the mind. And that allows us to then start listening. So just if you can be inspired to create a structured, formalized window of time to be silent in your day and sit in stillness.
I can't add to that. That was so good. And that brings me to the second thing I'm going to be stealing and giving you credit for, which is silence and listen. I'm giving a keynote next week to professional poker players on mindset and perspective. And that is totally going in that talk. And I'm going to be like, and this is from my brother, Tom, in Australia. So your message is going to reach many people. That was so good. I love that. So for everybody listening, here's the end of the show reminders. Number one, make sure you connect with Tom. I'll have all of his stuff linked in the show notes, but knowing everybody listening, there's a good chance, statistically speaking, 90% of you are already on your phone while listening to this. So open up Instagram, type Tom Cronin, hit follow, hit message, send gratitude, and at minimum do that. And second is create your Tom time or your sacred time or your ritual time, or just allow anything that you heard today. And I think to the point of listening, you were probably listening to this podcast in silence. And there were a few things that might have resonated with you. They might have been the, oop, not doing that. Well, here's your invitation, because that's the thing that you're being called to do. So try it on for size, be consistent with it. Use your rituals as reminders to be in your state and to be and perform in your optimum state. And Tom, I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for coming on the show, man, for sharing your wisdom, for sharing your gifts with all of us. And it was been a true pleasure, my friend.
Thank you so much for holding space, for creating this container and inspiring such deep and meaningful and important conversations that we need more of in our world. So much gratitude to you. And thanks everyone for tuning in and listening and allocating your time to being with us and communing with us. So deep gratitude for all of you as well.
Well said. Well said. So for everybody listening, this has been another episode of the Mind of George Show. So you will either see me in your eyeballs or you will hear me in your earballs. But either way, we're out.